I've been waiting to talk about this one. Season 6 was an absolutely fantastic successor to Season 5. It's not as innovative as it, sure, but it felt like the innovations made in Season 5 paved the way for this season to be as amazing as it was. It didn't have the rough start the previous season had, and the high points were even higher. Just like Season 5 though, there is not one episode this season that I dislike even remotely, and also similarly, what I think is the worst episode is only just okay. In fact, barring that one, every episode is one I can consider good. Sort of. I'm still debating on whether or not I consider one certain episode to be good, or just decent, but I'll get to that later. Point is, Season 6 is amazing, with more episodes that have reached greatness, and alongside Season 5, what I consider to be Death Battle's second peak. However, that also made it really challenging to rank these episodes this time around, especially where the top 5 was concerned, but you wouldn't be watching this right now if I never figured it out. If this is your first exposure to Death Battle, just know that I'll be spoiling each and every episode this season. There's a playlist linked in the description with all the episodes, and once you've watched them, we can see if your thoughts mirror mine. If you are familiar with the season already, just know that these are not ranked objectively worst to best, but rather my least favorite to favorite. With that out of the way, let's get started. Some seasons of Death Battle tend to come out with at least one whimper 4 episodes in at most, and most have even started with an unremarkable episode. With Season 6, however, we didn't actually get something subpar up until smack dab in the middle. The episode I'm referring to, of course, is Aang vs. Edward Elric. It's a damn shame this was a letdown, especially since I watched all of Avatar: The Last Airbender and Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood within the 3 weeks before it came out. It's definitely not a bad episode by any means, but it's certainly not good either. The analysis, while having some jokes that got a good chuckle out of me, as well as being well constructed besides calling deconstruction alchemy destruction alchemy, is very much hurt by Wiz sounding notably off. I know Ben was sick at the time of recording the script, but that was around the time Ben 10 vs. Green Lantern came out, and that was 3 episodes before this one, 2 whole months beforehand. I'm sure that was plenty of time for Ben to recover from his cold, record the script afterwards, and for the editor to put the whole video together. But instead, we got Quiet Wiz next to Loud Boomstick. It was almost at the point where I would have had to adjust the volume between the two talking, during Aang's rundown in particular. The fight though? I mean, it's better, but not by much. The action is fine overall, but there's really nothing to write home about, except for the hand-drawn elements for some of the bending and alchemy being pretty good. Elements of Alchemy is a good backing track, but on its own, it's just alright. As for voice acting, Aang sounded okay, but Ed, I think, sounded pretty spot on. The dialogue, though, yeah, we have some problems. While Aang felt pretty in character for the most part, note that I said for the most part, Ed had most of his dialogue relegated to him disliking being called short, which isn't out of character per se, but there's more to his character than just that, contrary to how his portrayal in the fight would lead you to believe. Like, I personally would have had
"How's this for small?"
and
"Nice try, shorty!"
taken out and replaced with other lines because as it is, the gag got tiring. I do like him having his own personal victory over Aang in that he's the taller of the two, even though he lost the fight. And that's really the only good thing about the death because holy hell is it bad. It's one of 2, maybe 3 deaths in the whole season that I actually dislike. The Avatar state looks fine, and the surrounding tornado looks cool, but the killing blow is hardly impactful. This shot genuinely feels slow, and when it hits, the tornado is gone, everything feels thrown off, and again, hardly lacks the impact it should have, and no thank you to the sound design. And don't even get me started on Aang's last line. You left me no choice? Aang, you literally refused to kill a literal tyrant and tried finding ways around doing so. But some kid attacking you over a pet peeve and trapping you underneath a bunch of rocks? Yeah, sure. That's where you're left no choice but to murder them. Saying nothing at all at the end would have felt more in character for Aang. Yeah, is it any wonder why this is at the bottom? Again, it's not terrible, but I'm certainly not calling it good either, which is a shame because I really wanted it to be. But let me tell you the true loss that happened in this fight. It's not any missed potential, or its life, never mind his arm. The true loss was Cabbage's. Oh wow, I put the only 2-minute long fight of the season low on the list. Who could have possibly guessed? Besides that glaring issue, I did enjoy Captain Marvel vs. Shazam, at least a little bit. Whether or not I'd call it good is not something I'm sure about right now. For one, the fight felt really basic, where it has a hard time standing out amongst the crowd. It had its moments, as I'll talk about later, but still. While Binary looked a hell of a lot better than she did in her previous episode, as the hole is no longer super obvious, it still carries the same issue of the sprite not resembling the base form sprite in any way. And the death was honestly just okay. I liked Billy's scream and how powerful the killing blow felt, but it also came out of nowhere with hardly any time to build up. That 2-minute long fight time really did you favors, didn't it? Also, Shazam winning was painfully obvious, especially after what happened with 18. So why did I enjoy this episode again? Well, the analysis was pretty interesting, especially when the hosts talk about the League of War about the name Captain Marvel. We even got Boomstick yelling motherfucking Enterprises, which was pretty entertaining. And the fight, although I said it was basic, it also felt really fast. Plus, there was plenty of impact from each hit. I enjoyed it overall. Plus, the voice acting was great. Terry Doty comes back to voice Carol once more, and I think she did better than before. Though special credit goes to Michael Kovac, who knocked it out of the park as Shazam. Seriously, I felt the intensity from pretty much every one of his screams. Also, Marvelous is a great track that complements the fight very well. It sounds like something fitting for two superheroes, and just like Unlocking Heaven and Chorus of Carnage before it, Brandon Yates did a remaster of this track last year, and he did a really good job with it, but that's honestly just par for the course at this point. This episode has issues that prevent it from getting any higher, but I'm feeling good in saying that I liked it. There are times where I think it's decent and other times where I think it's good, but I feel like everything above this is better anyway, so this is really the best spot for this one. Of all the episodes that could lead us off at the episodes I consider good, and it's the premiere. Funny how that worked out. Aquaman vs. Namor was a pretty solid episode. I didn't think it was that entertaining at first, but it's really grown on me. Could it have been better as the premiere? Certainly, but what we got was serviceable. The analysis was entertaining overall, and had some jokes that got a good chuckle out of me, namely Wiz stabbing Boomstick with a trident and that perfectly cut scream. Also, I believe Wiz is wrong, Aquaman is in fact SpongeBob, don't at me, and the fight is pretty solid all around. I think the setup is funny as hell, with it starting literally because Namor got mad after being splashed. It does seem a little weird at first given that it's water, but it's apparently in character for Namor. The action was really entertaining. It felt pretty close. The rock monsters clash with everything around them, especially Aquaman and Namor themselves, but it surprisingly doesn't bother me that much. I especially like seeing all the sea creatures once the fight gets taken to the ocean. Added some nice intensity. What also helps with the intensity is the fight track. Kings of the Sea is a super underappreciated track in my opinion, as it sounded awesome. Not to mention the use of violins and pianos was pleasing to the ears. Not a favorite, but still. I also think the voice acting was really good, as KG Tang and Todd Haberkorn both sounded like natural fits for Aquaman and Namor respectively. The former of which even has some especially fun and quotable lines, which stand out next to someone like Namor, whose general personality is that of a condescending asshole. But hey, it made the death just that tiny bit more satisfying, on top of being absolutely brutal and awesome in general. I loved the clashing of tridents and the only semblance of lighting in the area being from the surrounding anglerfish, all of which were closing in after each clash, giving it an increasing claustrophobic feel. And what happens afterwards? Namor is helpless as he's forced to undergo a seizure as the anglerfish mercilessly rip and tear him apart, and it's just so fucking brutal and has tons of shock value and I love it. This is how you start off a season strong in terms of the death department. As for the episode as a whole, I mean, good stuff overall, hardly any complaints, but as the episode meant to kick off the season and get people excited for what's to come, it could have been better in that aspect, although still, it was enjoyable, and that's better than what the previous two seasons had to show for their premieres. So, Deadpool came back for another episode, but with the twist that the matchup is rigged against him in favor of plot. Okay then. I was initially not fond of Deadpool vs. Mask even happening in the first place when a friend told me that it was announced. Then I saw the Next Time trailer, and it had the premise of Wiz and Boomstick picking this matchup specifically for Deadpool to lose. I was still not a fan, but I wasn't dreading it as much anymore. Then the episode came out, and I thought it was fine, but it wouldn't have gotten this high. Nowadays, though, it's really grown on me. It's a parody on matchups made out of spite, and it's really good in that aspect. Hell, we even got Wiz and Boomstick intentionally lowballing Deadpool while he's within earshot. Speaking of, even though it's his second time being a combatant, Deadpool is actually somewhat funny here. He's nowhere near as funny as he was in his fight with Deathstroke, but he still got a chuckle out of me. In the fight itself, he did get the occasional clever line, but the mask just completely overshadows him in that aspect. Most of the gags played in the fight that I found funny were from him, from no selling the decapitation to pretty much any cartoon slapstick present here really, which makes up much of the fight animation, and that makes it pretty enjoyable. It's all greatly enhanced by the hand-drawn animation being really good, as well as Goodbye Chimichanga being as good as it is as a backing track. I sadly can't say the same about it when listening to it on its own, though. Oh, and the voice acting is spectacular. I've already talked about how much I enjoy Taka's Deadpool, and pretty much everything applies here. And Kyle Iggy also did a fantastic job here, sounding comedic, yet also mentally insane, which pretty much is the mask. I also like how purposefully cheap the live-action segment was due to the set piece of Deadpool unintentionally using up all the budget with the continuity gem. Though the MLG horns in the Fortnite part were a bit jarring to me, not gonna lie, Wiz. But he did get another chance to use the continuity gem once he and the mask got all the budget. Except not really, because the mask is the mask, and all those comically insane antics play a part in the death, which made it awesome. The mask just completely stomps Deadpool, pulls out a literal nuke, and then it blows up with some nice comedic timing. Really good all around. Oh, but this episode isn't without its emotional moments. Yeah, those are in an episode of Death Battle. In the post-analysis, Wiz and Boomstick begin to realize that spite matchups aren't very fun to do, which leads them to reading a letter from Deadpool, which he did mail to them in the animation, which is some nice attention to detail you may not get on your first watch. Although it was meant to have heavy feelings attached, the moment leads to Deadpool coming back to life with the continuity gem, and it's quite honestly the perfect way to end the episode, and Deadpool's appearances on Death Battle as a whole. Unless the character Curtis is voicing in Macho Man vs. Kool-Aid Man is Deadpool, and I'm really hoping that's not the case, but I guess we'll see once October comes around. As for this episode, it's good. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. It's low on the list because everything else that's left I just enjoyed more. Long-range combat is not something we see a lot on this show, and when we do see it, it's usually not as exciting as when two characters are actually getting in close. As for this episode, it might be the most entertaining long-range fight we've ever gotten. Black Widow vs. Widowmaker was a really good episode. Not a great one, but still. The analysis this time around was entertaining, with Wiz literally shocking Boomstick, and we even got to learn a bit about colloidal silver. Boomstick even drinks it, and his skin has even turned blue at the end of the post-analysis. A very nice touch, I may add. As for negatives, I don't think I needed to hear about Natasha being fully conscious during a surgery. No thanks for that uncomfortably disturbing imagery. Thankfully, the fight doesn't get anywhere near that level of disturbing. It's actually a lot of fun. The long-ranged action was really cool to watch, and it works with the two being snipers. Plus, there are plenty of moments where Natasha gets to be a badass, which is great. Best part is, it extends beyond just simple actions. There's some lines of hers that are goddamn badass. Most notably,
I'm a goddamn Avenger.
These lines and deliveries really stand out next to someone like Widowmaker, whose personality is that of an assassin with a one-track mind to just kill, really. I feel like I've said something similar before. Could just be me. Whatever. Yeah, the deliveries from Natalie Von Sistine are especially great here. She did fantastically overall, and the same applies to Jeannie Tirardo, who sounded spot on for Chloe Hollings when voicing Widowmaker. I also really love how the fight takes place during a night where it's snowing. Fitting for how cold-blooded these two can be, both figuratively and literally in the case of one of them. Widow's Kiss is a great track too. It's quiet, but effective given who these two are, and it works as a backing track. It's nice to listen to on its own as well. The hand-to-hand segment at the end is also really good, with some really awesome shots. Sure, the grappling hook looks weird as f*** here, and the movements afterwards lack weight, and sure, the glass shards aren't leaving visible marks on Natasha's model, but besides those issues, it's really good, and it comes to a head with that awesome death. I feel like I'm saying that a lot this video, aren't I? Widowmaker is pinned down, disarmed, and being strangled by a wire, which Natasha then uses to decapitate her, but not before that great comeback to Widowmaker's last line, where she says she can survive anything. May have been a nice theory on paper, but when tested, it was proven to be untrue. What is true is that I believe this to be a good episode. I'd be lying if I said that I don't come back to this every once in a while. Oh boy. This one. Time to talk about the episode that dethroned Goku vs. Superman as the most controversial episode in the series. The reception for Ben 10 vs. Green Lantern surely was something. And I mean, holy crap, that's a lot of dislikes. It's not as much as either Goku vs. Superman episode has received, but it's still a worse ratio. I'm gonna say this right now. I believe that Hal Jordan's victory was legit, and this is coming from someone who had Ben 10 as a big part of his childhood. I could explain everything here and now, but not only would I make this segment so much longer than it already is, but also, versus debating is subjective, and I don't want to do that in this video. If I were to say everything anyway, it's hardly boasting to say that I think I could explain it better than the post-analysis did, because it did not sell Hal's victory very well. They only really went into detail on why Hal counters everything Alien X can do, and that's it. And yes, I know the shorthand term for that is hacks, but I genuinely despise that word with a goddamn passion, and I refuse to use it for any reason. There are statements in the video that do suggest Hal being stronger and faster than Alien X, but they're just in the tabs up in the corner. Yes, I know they sometimes do contain information that can be considered vital, but when it's stats, it should have gotten more focus in the video. Hell, I would have had the stat arguments take precedence in the script over, say, how Alien X only created a copy universe because he couldn't stop the original from being blown up in the first place. Just an idea. Now, there's another major criticism the episode has received. What was it again? Oh right, the death. Ignoring the memes that spawn from it, which I find hilarious to this day, to the point where I even own the shirt based off of one of them, it's really not a good way for any battle to end. Going back in time to the beginning of the fight to win has very little impact and feels like a genuine cop-out, and it doesn't sell Hal being faster than the Omnitrix's failsafe either, thanks to the scissors construct cutting Ben's arm off noticeably more slowly than the speed of the Big Bang. Makes the line,
"Yeah, how the hell did Hal beat Alien X?"
sound very off, because unless you're talking about a race through the time portal, which Hal did beat Alien X in, then no, he didn't beat Alien X in a fight. I love the memes that spawn from it, but remove those entirely, and we'd have a death I'd outright dislike. Oh geez, I was not intending to talk about the glaring negatives for that long, especially since I actually like this episode. Well, I suppose I'll balance that out by talking about everything else. Starting with the analysis, I like the little bonding moment Wiz and Boomstick have over an insane feat from Hal. Don't have anything else to say, it's just a nice moment. While I genuinely don't agree with Wiz saying that overuse of the Omnitrix can cause your DNA to be permanently disfigured, I do find alien hybrid Boomstick to be pretty funny. What I also find funny is the literal yellow elephant just appearing in the room once Boomstick said that he'd address such. Honestly, great joke. Best one in the episode. And the fight animation is absolutely great. I liked seeing all the different aliens appearing at the beginning. The transformation into forearms was a very nice recreation of the original, and Heat Blast is drawn incredibly well in all of his shots. Not to mention, Hal countering his flames with a fire extinguisher construct was just clever. Way Big appearing was also nice, and funny how he appeared directly after Grey Matter, one of Ben's smallest aliens, and that first line of his is very quotable. Alien X appearing as early as he did does raise some issues, but I like what he does when he first appears, flicking Hal's nose and that sends him into space. Oh, and those issues I mentioned earlier? They only used 6 aliens, and 2 of them don't even fight Hal, and the fact that they used Kid Ben, who doesn't have Alien X at that point. Not to mention, Nicholas Andrew Louis' voice coming out of him just sounds off. Thing is, though, there's enough that's entertaining that any missed potential that's here doesn't bother me that much. Plus, Hal's gotta have some moments to shine too, and oh boy does he shine when reciting the Green Lantern Oath. Bradley Gareth already did spectacularly as Hal beforehand, but he truly shined with his deliveries for the Oath in particular, and that scream afterwards was just intense and awesome. Seriously, his performance in general is up there as one of the best in the series. Same for Nicholas Andrew Louis, as every one of Ben's aliens that appeared in the fight, and he sounded natural doing all of them. I know I just said his voice coming out of Kid Ben sounded weird, but as his aliens though, he's proven to have range, and it's no wonder he's been a series regular. Also, the fight track. Oh my god. Emerald Heroes is up there as one of my favorite tracks in the series. It's actually my second favorite in the season. There's these synths that give it a space feeling, and the lyrics help with it too, and the whole thing just sounds awesome in general. So yeah, a lot of good and a lot of bad, but the good outweighs the bad enough that I'm able to put this episode this high at all. And quite honestly, I'd still be saying this even if I disagreed with the verdict. I'm gonna move on now because I've talked about this episode for too long now. Some matchups are agreed upon to be close, and others complete stomps. With this matchup, it's widely agreed upon that the verdict was correct, and I definitely agree with that notion, but I also believed it was close as all hell, at least at the time of it coming out. Whether it was presented that way in the analysis is not something I'd agree with given the numbers shown, but in the fight it sure as hell felt that way. Yeah, let's just say that Mob versus Tatsumaki kept me on the edge of my seat, cause it was great. The choreography has quite a bit of back and forth going on once Mob goes 100%, which is what makes it feel close, and it especially gets intense and crazy once he goes %%, but I'll touch up on that later. I like how both of their psychic powers are mapped to 2 different colors so the choreography is easy to follow, and it just looks great stylistically too. Though there are some parts that are still a bit confusing, but it's few and far between thankfully. Speaking of stylistic, you've probably noticed how both characters are hand-drawn half the time. Although there's plenty of art styles going on since this is done by multiple animators, all with different art styles, it still looks really good to me personally, and sometimes I find myself forgetting that this is even a sprite episode, and they were even able to fit in one's art style. I really like how destructive the fight is. Even if the city is abandoned, it's all very nice visually, and it still gets across how these two just want the other dead. It's especially amplified by the fight track, 100%. It just sounds intense and chaotic, and it works with this fight splendidly. Although it's not as good as a solo track, I do still find myself listening to it every once in a while. The voice acting is also fitting for these two characters. Beau Bridgeland gets Mob's inflections across perfectly and does great, even if he doesn't have much dialogue compared to Tatsumaki, who is voiced by Jennifer Alex. She did a great job making her sound like the brat she is. Hell, I'd almost say she was too good since the brattiness almost makes me wish she ended up losing the fight. Well, time to talk about the %% segment, which is also the last minute of the fight. Everything is especially crazy as the whole city is now being weaponized at this point, and even knowing who wins, it feels like Tatsumaki is in genuine danger here since the condescending, arrogant tone she usually carries with her is replaced with just angry screeching. Crazy to think she was able to pull through with that meteor she pulled out of the sky before getting slammed into the ground, covered in her own blood, and having her own body twisted around itself. Holy shit, let it not be said that it wasn't a hard-fought victory, especially after that. My one problem is that the last shot of Tatsumaki looks off-model, especially with the hair, and especially since the previous shot of her was very on-model. Even still, this episode was really, really good. To the point where I'd call it great even, and to think we're only at number 10 right now, guess it just proves how great this season is as a whole. Looking back, it was pretty amusing to see a Ruby character show up in the next time after the controversial Ben 10 vs. Green Lantern, which that in and of itself brings in a bit of controversy given that Ruby is also a Rooster Teeth property, as well as the fact that the, at the time, only other Ruby episode also had a controversial verdict. It really did make the verdict here that much more refreshing to see, regardless of how the fight itself ended, but I'll get to that later. For now, I want to talk about how much I loved Weiss vs. Mitsuru. Starting with the analysis, there's a couple of good jokes here, like Boomstick thinking Weiss's father is Colonel Sanders, and most notably, Boomstick's chart on explosions, which might be my favorite cutaway gag in the series. I think I've quoted "oh shit, we're dead" far more than just once in my lifetime. The analysis is held back by the mispronunciations of Naoto and Yukari's names. Why they chose to pronounce them that way, I will never understand. Now, the fight itself, and it's awesome. For one, it looks absolutely beautiful. If you ask me, it's the most gorgeous looking fight we've gotten up to this point. Who knew that Unreal and cell shading could make Death Battle look so much better? My only issue is Weiss's outfit looking more blue than normal, but I'm quite honestly not bothered by it since I'm distracted by how awesome the choreography is. It captures the aesthetic of a Ruby fight in that it feels like a choreographed dance, and it also happens to fit Mitsuru as well. I guess that's partly due to Persona 3 having a dancing spin-off. We even got this use of Weiss's glyphs that I always found to be very creative. I'm not really sure why they decided to just skip the setup in the animation though. It feels like there's something big missing, like how the two even decided to start fighting. Plus, skipping the setup hurts the crossover aspect quite a bit. The friendly interaction they had at the beginning was nice, though. Another issue is this one shot of the ice behind Mitsuru just popping out of existence, but you'll likely forget it happened given how well put together everything else is for the most part. Seeing Artemisia and the Queen Lancer showing up was also a real treat, even if their fight was sort of brief, as well as this f***ing awesome shot of Weiss and Mitsuru fighting in the same shot as the Armagigas and Artemisia fighting. There's a 2v2 dynamic going on here, and I love it for that. All of this is greatly enhanced by Winter Sonata as a backing track. Although there was a missed opportunity to give the track lyrics, given that both of these franchises have soundtracks that are known for their vocals, it has this elegant feeling that fits the two characters very well, and it sounds quite nice in general. The voice acting is also really good. Weiss is reprised by her official voice actress, Kara Eberly, who does a great job as usual, and Mitsuru was voiced by former Screwtech employee Corey Pettit, who absolutely nailed it. What a fantastic way for her to come back, even if it was just for this video. And the ending. Oh boy. I like how tense everything is, with Artemisia about to unleash a giant Megidolon explosion. Although Mitsuru not bleeding here looks wrong, at least everything else was great. In terms of the explosion anyway. Both are worn down afterwards, with Weiss's aura depleted, and Mitsuru heals herself. I like how clear it is that Weiss was absolutely screwed here, and that Mitsuru was about to begin the execution. And then she does, and it's a reference to her instant kill. Or astral finish, whatever you want to call it really. It's a nice recreation up until Mitsuru stabs Weiss. Okay. It doesn't look like she was stabbed. It looks like Mitsuru poked her sword in her general direction, and it genuinely does not look like a kill move. We don't even see Weiss's body hit the ground, only her sword breaking. To me, it looks like the fight ended in a knockout, which isn't acceptable if you're trying to tell me this was a fight to the death. It says a lot that I would have preferred Weiss's character model popping out of existence when the ice shattered, because while I'd still criticize it for looking off, at least it would have gotten across that Weiss died, far better than the finisher we got. Overall, there are some flaws in this episode, namely the killing blow, but they're massively outweighed by the good stuff. It's a great episode that I'll enjoy rewatching should I choose to do so. Regardless of who actually wins, I think we can all agree that the animation teams are spectacular at what they do, but I think I've made that clear before. I bring this up because there's a lot of debate on whether or not this episode was correct, but me personally, I can't say I know enough about either character to pick a side. But one thing's for certain, the fight animation was freaking awesome. And that's really why I adored Sasuke vs. Hiei. Every time I come back to it, it is a joy each time. The action is really good, with a good amount of their abilities going back and forth, and it felt really fast most of the time. The Dragon of the Darkness Flame in particular and how it's animated also just looks really awesome here. The hand-drawn assets also feel like there was a lot of effort put into them. There are some that are noticeably off-model, but then there's most of Hiei's close-ups that look like the animators did their own take on the Yu Yu Hakusho art style, and they did a great job with it. Susanoo especially looked absolutely fantastic, and it just made that fight between him and the Dragon of the Darkness Flame just that much more awesome and visually engaging. And the sound design throughout the whole thing was awesome, really helping this fight feel intense. The voice acting was also really good. Well, maybe not the deliveries of the first few lines, but over time, it got a lot better. Hell, Kyle Phillips in some deliveries sounded practically identical to Yuri Lowenthal's portrayal of Sasuke. As for Hiei, while there's definitely differences between Howard Wang's voice in this episode and the official performance from Chuck Huber, the former sounded similar enough to the latter that it was at the point where it still felt like Hiei, and that's all you really need to sound good with the role. But what especially got me to love this episode is the track. Dangerous Gaze was something I could not stop listening to when I first heard it, as it sounded genuinely awesome, especially that guitar solo in the middle. I loved how intense it got as it went on, as it also fit how intense the fight got as it went on. It's one of my favorite tracks in the series, and my third favorite from the season. And speaking of awesome, let's talk about that death, shall we? It's a one-stroke duel, and those have always been really good, and this one is no different, and it felt powerful given that both characters are putting everything they have into their attacks, and not to mention, the two slashes formed into the crater. There's a lot of tension after the fact, leaving you wondering who actually won the duel. But then, as it turned out, it was Sasuke who fell, which genuinely surprised me when I first saw this episode. Everything seemed like Sasuke was going to win from what I've gathered before the fight came out, and seeing him lose instead? Well, it did add some shock value to the death in that aspect, but also, Boomstick was saying what I was thinking in the post-analysis. What happened? Well, in the end, I did think their explanation for Hiei's victory was pretty solid all around, and while I don't doubt Hiei being stronger than Sasuke, I feel like the calculation for the tree-punching feat was dubiously high, even when accounting for the demon world being hardier than Earth. Even still, this episode was an awesome one, and definitely something I'll come back to, regardless of how I'll feel about the verdict. In case you're wondering how I feel about it now, I genuinely see arguments for both sides, so I guess you can say I'm unsure about it, but I also don't care about the matchup. Not that it's bad, it's a good matchup actually, just that I have no attachment to it, so yeah. Since the Pokemon Battle Royale, we've been eagerly awaiting when and what the next Battle Royale would be, which we wouldn't know until almost 5 years later. Having all the prominent Mega Men fighting each other wouldn't have been my first choice, though to be fair, I wouldn't have an answer prepared for if you were to ask what I'd pick, but it did end up making for what I consider to be the best Battle Royale episode in the series. Mega Man Battle Royale was really amazing. Between the analysis having some fun moments and the animation being spectacular, we have an episode that most people would put higher than this, but I just happen to enjoy the remaining 6 episodes more. Let's start with the analysis, particularly Volnut's rundown. As much as I think the Diet Mega Man joke was funny, we got Boomstick's Legends rant, which was absolutely golden. Seriously, he says what we're all thinking about how Legends 2 ended and how frustrating it is that Legends 3 got cancelled. God truly is dead in this scenario. Honestly, it's the best joke in the episode. Now let's talk about the fight animation. The action is a lot of fun, with a bunch of different weapons being thrown around, with the unfortunate drawback of none of the Mega Men changing colors as they switch to a different weapon, but it would have made the animation process a lot more tedious if they did that, and with 5 characters in play, all of which looking kinda similar, sporting similar color palettes, come on, it's understandable, and besides, everything else makes up for it. The back and forth between seeing Classic and X fighting and seeing EXE and Geo fighting is pretty cool. Makes the episode feel like there's a lot going on at once, as any battle that involves 5 characters should. Oh, and Volnut's just kinda there, I guess. Made for some nice comedic moments though, like every other Mega Man having a weapon that creates a black hole while he doesn't. Hell, the black hole actually kills him. And I have no feelings towards that death. Or Classic's death for that matter, other than the explosion looking cool as all hell. Actually, wait, I do have words for the black hole scene. I really like how tense it is, with the black hole's presence alone, and even the music cutting out, something Death Battle doesn't really do anymore, and I miss that. It adds for some time to breathe, making the fights feel full, or it could add some tension like right here. Anyway, the last minute of the fight is great too. There's something funny about Geo not being able to recover while EXE does it with ease, and X just does it from his metal core. The whole rest of the fight felt fast, with Geo dashing towards X while EXE's attacking from behind, while X himself uses the Mother Elf. It's all a very awesome sequence, and the same applies to everything that follows after Geo possesses X. Not only was it all visually cool, it was also tense as all hell. I also like EXE reacting to the visible damage caused in the city. But the deaths themselves were vaporization, so okay, I'll throw it a bone and call it okay, only because I love the build-up.
Man, all of these Mega Men and none of them know how to use Task Manager? Shaking my
Get out!
head.
Get in here! Get out of my video! Anyway, the only problem I have with the fight animation as a whole is the sound design being a few frames off, and it's very noticeable in some areas. It's few and far between enough to the point where I can say that it doesn't bother me that much in the end. What is good about the audio is the fight track. Mega Mania sounds fitting for the Mega Man franchise, as well as being an absolutely hype track, and for some reason, it makes me feel a sense of nostalgia for when I was 9 or 10 years old, even though I was never into Mega Man at the time. Regardless, Yates absolutely killed it with this track, and quite honestly, the whole Death Battle crew killed it with this episode. It's nice to see a battle royale in the midst of all the 1v1 matchups the show usually does, and it's also nice to see this one be as good as it is. Now I'm excited to see what they do for their next battle royale. Oh. There are some episodes in the series that can be described as dumb fun. This one gives the impression that it will be that way just from the matchup alone. And holy hell did they make Wario vs. King DDD into a masterpiece in that aspect. The analysis is good, although not one of my favorites in the season, but I'll give it credit where it's due. The Windbreaker is one of few fart jokes I actually find funny. When I'm in the correct mood anyway. But for what it's worth, it's a hell of a lot better than most other fart jokes in existence. Of course, there was also Wiz being confused on how DDD was able to train himself to fly while Boomstick tells him to just accept it. That was fun too. And then there's the fight, and holy crap is it good. Having the two start out in their strongest forms was a little weird, but it did allow this fight to set itself apart from everything else the series has done, and it didn't take long for me to grow to appreciate the uniqueness. Besides, the flashbacks that took place after they went back to their base forms were hilarious, and made the fight that much more interesting. Though, the Waddle Dee growing a mouth afterwards just looked uncomfortably disturbing to me. As for the action itself, there's a nice blend of intensity and cartoon slapstick despite them being sprites, so while it's a lot of fun to watch how ridiculous it gets, it also does a good job keeping your eyes glued to the screen, wondering who's gonna win and what's gonna happen next. It is a cage match after all. Well, until Wario farts a nuke in DDD's mouth and the cage is destroyed. I can't make this shit up, I swear. It's all complemented very well by Appetite for Greed sounding like it belongs in something comedic, with its reliance on brass instruments and whatnot, and it also happens to feel right at home with these characters. The giant battle is also really good, with the sound design feeling very powerful with most attacks, and just when you thought the fight stopped being wacky, it ends up continuing to be that way, and they rode that right out to the end with the killing blow. Wario charges up another fart nuke against DDD, only for him to send a Gordo his way, corking Wario's asshole, causing him to explode, blowing up the planet they were fighting on. I swear to God, I still can't make this shit up. And come to think of it, is that even how farts work? Oh well, it was stupidly entertaining and I love it, and the same can be said about the fight as a whole. I genuinely can't help but get the stupidest smile on my face each time I watch it, and as a whole, there's really not a lot to complain about. I suppose there is a continuity issue with the audience and the fact that Castle DDD is supposed to be on Popstar and not some random-ass planet, but those are just small fries. If anything, it proves how well made this episode was. Truly a masterpiece. Just not one I'd give the top spot, though. And speaking of, the competition for number 1 was tough. And I mean really tough. This is one of 5 episodes I had considered for that spot, and they're all very deserving of it just based on how good they are. But a spot on a list only has room for 1 episode, so some nasty sacrifices had to be made. Although this episode and the next entry fell into their spots pretty quickly, let me explain how that's not exactly a testament for how much I enjoyed them. I'll start with Ghost Rider vs. Lobo, as that's what I put at this spot. The analysis is, once again, pretty enjoyable. I liked the South Park reference, Wiz's last line in Ghost Rider's rundown is chilling in a good way, and Deadpool's brief appearance in Lobo's rundown was pretty funny for some reason. Wasn't necessary, but it got a chuckle out of me. I do have a complaint here though, and it just so happens to be the only thing I can complain about in the episode, and that is the fact that bringing up New 52 Lobo wasn't exactly necessary. Yeah, I get that it was a bad incarnation of Lobo, but it was honestly best left out, as it's not the Lobo we're talking about in this episode. If that's the only thing to complain about and it's in the analysis, then I guess that means we're in for one hell of a fight animation. Pun probably intended. First things first, the action. The bike chase at the start felt pretty fast, not the fastest in the world, but enough that it was fun to watch their abilities clash. I like how it starts with Lobo running over Ghost Rider while flipping him off though. That's just great. When the bike chase ends, the fun's still not over. We get some pretty ridiculous moments from Lobo, namely when he crushes the building he sent Johnny into down to the size of a marble and eats it. And it seems like he also got sent to DeviantArt, and like Charizard before him, hated it so much that he exploded. Don't worry though, he can grow clones of himself through his blood, he was fine. Ridiculous moments from Lobo isn't all this fight's comprised of, especially with the much more serious character Ghost Rider. This guy gave me chills throughout the fight, no doubt helped by his dialogue and Stephen Kelly's awesome performance. During the fight's 3-minute long runtime, Ghost Rider is doing all he can to end the fight as quickly as possible, and as Lobo continues to resist, he gets more and more agitated, and it gets to the point where Zarathos had to come out, and he was not happy. If you really think about it, Ghost Rider's behavior throughout the fight made for some great build-up to the death. At the beginning, he says this.
Lobo of Zarnia, your sins are innumerable. I am here to...
Oh, he got cut off. Well, let's see what he says at the end.
Lobo of Zarnia, your sins are innumerable. I am here to wreak vengeance upon your soul. No.
Gonna be honest, one of my all-time favorite deaths in the show. It's just borderline perfect in my eyes. Ghost Rider's increasing agitation is my favorite part of the whole fight, and it came to a head here. You can just hear in his tone how fed up he is with Lobo at this point. I don't really blame him, their fight made a big ol' crater in the earth. Not to mention the chill factor and shock value were both insane. Hell, I was such in awe at how good it was that my sister mistook my tone for me crying and needed to make sure I was okay. Yeah, it's fair to say that Ghost Rider stole the show for me. I feel a little bad about it since I think Jason Marnocha also did a really good job in his role voicing Lobo. This is the same guy who voiced Deathstroke back in his episode, by the way, and as you may know, I feel that Deadpool stole the show there. In other words, this is the second time this guy did a really good job, but his opponent had that extra thing about them that caused them to take the spotlight. You'll get it one day, Jason, I'm sure. Oh, but I haven't talked about the fight track yet. Ride into Hell is another favorite of mine, as the grungy rock feel it relies on just clicks very well with me. Plus, that guitar solo at the end just sounds frantic and awesome and I love it. I also love this episode as a whole. I was expecting it to be good, but nowhere near this level. Always love it when an episode gets to be an unexpected hit, and there's a few more like that down the line. Would have loved to put this closer to the top, but it happened to be in a season where the quality was consistently better than it ever has been before. This one's a bit personal to me. I guess I should explain. So a week before this fight came out, my family and I started going through some pretty dark times. I'd elaborate more, but the details are best kept private. Thankfully, it didn't take long for things to start looking up, and the day before things were resolved happened to be when this fight came out. I bring up the story in the first place because I wanted to prove how much of a testament it is as to how much I enjoyed the episode and knew it was amazing when I first saw it, in spite of all that was going on at the time. Alright, heavy stuff over. Dragon Zord vs. Mechagodzilla is amazing. The analysis, once again, had a good few jokes I liked. The cutaway gag with Boomstick thinking all knives are flutes gets me every time, and Kiryu having a worse battery life than the Nintendo Switch is another thing I chuckle at. Also, our hosts arguing over the terminology for geese is always a fun gag, mainly because it hasn't been overused in the slightest and never felt unnecessary. But all that's nothing compared to the fight animation. For one, it looks absolutely beautiful, par for the course with Unreal. Secondly, the choreography is awesome. It's a bit slower than normal since they're both giant mechs, but what's sacrificed in speed was in favor of impact and sheer spectacle, and it works. It especially gets better when Akane dies and the ghost of the original Godzilla takes over as Kiryu's pilot, where he gets more ruthless and just starts kicking Dragon Zord's ass. Save for a very noticeable awkward cut, it's all very exciting and I loved seeing it. Doesn't last so long to the point where it looks like the animators hate Dragon Zord, but long enough that Tommy summoning the other Zords to create fighting mode felt justified. And yeah, that transformation sequence was awesome. And to top it all off, most of the hits felt very impactful, and this shot here made for an awesome reference to the box cover of Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. Something I see people criticizing is the lack of a setup, where the fight animation starts with the two already fighting, similar to Weiss vs. Mitsuru, but here's how I see it. With Weiss vs. Mitsuru, the first thing we hear in the fight animation is the clashing of their rapiers, so it's clear right from the get-go that they were already fighting. That's not the impression I got from here, as the first thing we hear is loud thumping from the Dragon Zord taking steps, and what we see is the Dragon Zord walking into frame, with Kiryu first showing up to shoot a laser. I can kinda see where people are coming from, and I'd certainly get the same impression if there were explosions going off as well. But as it is, it looks like the two had just started fighting as they saw the other as a threat. We didn't see the setup, sure, and that's still an issue, but it's nowhere near as jarring as in Weiss vs. Mitsuru. Now, what else did I like about the fight? Well, I think the voice acting from Nicholas Andrew Louis and Hitomi Farrell as Tommy and Akane respectively was pretty good, the former of which does the inflections of a Power Ranger really well, and the latter is actually speaking in Japanese, which was a very nice and welcome surprise. It shows us that Death Battle can cast people to speak a different language besides English if they so choose, and they eventually would for another episode. And speaking of things that sound good, my god, Draconic Robotics is another bop of a track, not only sounding great on its own, but also great as a backing track. Plus, it sounds atmospheric to me. Man, Season 6 has a lot of tracks I consider to be amazing, I swear. As for the death, I sadly can't say I have any feelings for it. I liked Kiryu surviving the drill stab, I liked Kiryu actually pulling the spear further inside to get up close to the Dragon Zord, I liked how the Absolute Zero cannon was used as the killing blow, and how it also hit the building behind the Dragon Zord. I don't like the camera angle they chose for Dragon Zord struggling to remove the sphere, and the cracks genuinely look weird to me. I suppose the death was alright overall now that I'm talking about it. At the very least, it wasn't terrible, and besides, I got the whole rest of the episode to appreciate, and it only got better once the dark times passed. Believe it or not, I had initially put this at number 1, but as I kept working through this list, it just ended up not being as good as the remaining 3 episodes in my eyes. Figuring out what the top 3 would consist of was surprisingly pretty easy. Their actual spots on the list? That was a different matter entirely. There were many times where I had second-guessed myself with their placements and kept moving them around for the longest time. It got to the point where I ended up figuring out number 1 before I figured out the spots for this and the next entry. Hell, this might actually be interchangeable with what I have at number 2 for all I know. But, in the end, this is what I've decided, that this was just barely not enough to reach the top 2. Still, the top 3 is a feat on its own for this list, and Ganondorf vs. Dracula is definitely worthy of being this high. A trait this episode shares with the 2 episodes I have higher than this is the analysis being chock full of jokes I really liked. Ganondorf having the best odds on Tinder, Wiz and Boomstick laughing about how Ganondorf escaped the Sacred Realm the next day, Boomstick thinking he's a master of science because he figured out that Dog is God backwards because of how Alucard is Dracula backwards, you name it. Boomstick was on his game this episode, and there's more moments from him I can name right now. Like the granddaddy of them all, the 6-step plan for becoming a vampire. One of the most amusing jokes in the series, right there. Though, wouldn't it be 5 steps because step 6 is basically just pat yourself on the back because you did it? Oh well, I'm not gonna question it. Anyway, the fight animation is phenomenal. What a great first impression from the source filmmaker animators they brought on for this episode, and I'm happy they kept coming back for more. While some of the movements at the beginning felt a bit unnatural, everything else makes up for it. Like how great the expression work is all around. Hell, you might even forget that there was jank early on to begin with. The action is very flashy and fun from start to finish, and makes great use of both of their arsenals, which for some reason included Medusa heads on Dracula's part. Not that I'm complaining, since it was a cool sequence, so who gives a shit. There's also an atmosphere that's sure to run chills down your spine throughout the entire fight, and it works very well here, complemented very well by the Dark Lords as a backing track. Even on its own, it manages to be yet another one of my all-time favorite original tracks. The dramatic, gothic tone it goes for is just very appealing to me. Plus, that crescendo is sure to get chills to run up my spine, especially when it happens alongside Dracula's transformation. The gothic imagery of him standing before Ganondorf, coupled with him kicking his ass afterwards, holy shit, it sells how intimidating Dracula can be when he transforms. And goddamn, Ganondorf's transformation into Ganon was also an experience, especially with that roar, and also the fact that his scream beforehand sounded like his VA was an actual pain while recording. Oh yeah, the voice acting is absolutely fantastic. As I've implied just now, I think William T. Sopp's acting was fantastic, and actually feels like Ganondorf, and Stephen Kelly is back for another fantastic performance, this time as Dracula, who once again stole the show. That laugh, coupled with some of his dialogue, and the effects on his voice after transforming gave me chills. I also liked his delivery on the infamous "What is a man" line, even if the writing seems to have forgotten the word little in "a miserable little pile of secrets." Ah well, the line still felt the same, so whatever. Dracula also got a line from before the killing blow that was so good that it even rivals "I've been playing human" from Iron Man vs. Lex Luthor. Hell, the death itself is godlike in every way possible, and might actually be my favorite from the season, possibly even the series. The castle explodes from Dracula's demonic Megiddo, and here, just watch.
You're right. You're not a man. You're a pig. Let me hear you squeal.
Holy crap, it always amazes me how good that ending is every time I watch it. Dracula's dialogue, namely "let me hear you squeal," the build-up, not to mention the gothic imagery, the false hope that Ganondorf could pull off a surprise win before Dracula wastes no time to rip that from him, it's all fantastic, making for one of the best deaths in the show's history. In fact, I'd say that this whole episode was among the best in the show's history. Everything came together to make something I absolutely adored. But then there's the remaining 2 episodes, which were somehow even better. Remember from my Season 2 video when I said that Ryu vs. Scorpion was my favorite Sprite episode in the series for 5.5 years? I think I want to correct myself and change that to 4.5 years, because upon rewatch, I realized how much I enjoyed this episode more. Johnny Cage vs. Captain Falcon was hype incarnate, what with Boomstick getting excited about these characters in the analysis and the fight animation feeling incredibly fast. It all exudes an aura that makes you get excited while watching the video. Boomstick's different names for the Nut Punch were fun to hear, and he even tries it on Wiz, only for it to not be his first rodeo. I don't care if characters attempting something stupid and getting hurt is predictable, it's funny as hell, damn it! I also really like what he says when Wiz talks about how one can become the next Captain Falcon by surpassing the current holder of the title.
New life goal unlocked!
While the analysis tells us that Captain Falcon's nemesis is Black Shadow and that he's evil, I have reason to believe that he isn't the most evil of evil. That would be door frames. Anyway, let's talk about how amazing the fight animation is. There's plenty of back and forth, giving both characters the time to shine, and like I said, it feels incredibly fast from start to finish, even before the fight is taken to the F-Zero track. The aerial combat gets my blood pumping every time, as it is just super exciting, and the real stuff is when they get to the racetrack. The two fighting on top of the vehicles while they're moving only makes things feel even more hype than before. Hype is what they were going for with this episode after all, and believe it or not, we're still not done with the increase of adrenaline. We got boost pads. My god, I was not expecting that set piece, but holy hell did I enjoy the use of it in the fight. And throw in Falcon Uncaged as a backing track and we have something truly godlike, with it sounding like something straight from F-Zero. Though, admittedly, a little Mortal Kombat influence wouldn't have hurt. It's also hype as f*** on its own, also being able to boast S tier in my eyes. And did I mention the voice acting and dialogue is great? Starting with the latter, Johnny's lines are a lot of fun to listen to, with him being, well, a cheesy movie star. And that exchange that took place after the Nut Punch was amazing. Falcon, on the other hand, doesn't have much of a personality to work with, but he does have a lot of iconic lines from Smash to work with, and it was fun hearing them here. Going to the voice acting, Johnny was voiced by Kieran Flitton, who clearly sounded like he had a lot of fun with the role, and that's what made his dialogue pleasing to the ears. He was passionate about the character after all. And Falcon also had a voice actor, which may have seemed odd at first, but after Keston Howard's performance, I could see why they cast him, as he did a great job replicating the broken English Falcon is known for. Plus, he sounded very similar to Ryo Horikawa. And finally, the death. Holy shit is it hype. Besides Cage not being seen from the inside of the Blue Falcon, everything is great, with the sequence feeling fast, Johnny's scream, and that Falcon punch, man. I think we all knew that it was going to be the killing blow, but it doesn't make it any less entertaining. It was exciting, and that's something I can use to describe this whole fight. It's no wonder this was the first Death Battle episode to get trending on YouTube. This is something that could have been at number 1, but sadly, as quoted by Captain Falcon himself, only one can be worthy. And there's just one more episode that just happened to have been the obvious answer for what would go to that spot all along. I'm sure you've all figured it out by now, whether you've watched my other videos or not, that Season 6 is my all-time favorite season of Death Battle. Season 2 may have been when I started watching, and it's able to boast having 2 episodes in my overall top 3, including my favorite episode of all time, but it's incredibly long for today's standards, and the age shows sometimes, particularly early on. Season 5 may have had so much innovation, far more than this season admittedly, and it is what rekindled my love for the show, but it doesn't feel as polished as this season did overall. I can call 8 episodes here excellent. That's half the season. Not something I can say about any other season as of uploading this video. What is also unique to this season is that there's only one episode that I know for sure wasn't good. Just one. Though that may change once I make up my mind on Captain Marvel vs. Shazam, but one thing's for certain, it's better than Raven vs. Twilight Sparkle. And what I have at number 1 here is my 4th favorite Death Battle episode of all time, making it my favorite Rooster Teeth era episode. When I was still trying to figure out the spots for this episode and the previous 2 entries, something dawned on me. Everything in this episode just seemed so godlike. Most of it might even be perfect. Hell, there's not really anything that jumps out to me as a legitimate issue. It just seemed to me that this was the episode in the season with the highest quality. Eventually, I decided to watch it again, and compared it to the previous 2 entries, and that's when I made up my mind that this is what I'm going to call the best episode of Season 6. Did anyone expect All Might vs. Might Guy to be the season finale? And on that note, did anyone expect it to end up being justified with how good it ended up being? When I think of finale-worthy matchups, what usually comes to mind is big rivalries or matchups that can escalate to such a huge scale. What doesn't come to mind and ended up working anyway was 2 heroes who inspire others to be just as strong as them one day. There is a special kind of awesome that applies to this episode that makes it feel like a finale anyway, and I am living for it. In fact, it's very easily my favorite season finale in the series as of right now. Let's start with the analysis. Much like the previous 2 entries, Boomstick was chock full of jokes I took a liking to, like how he named attacks after food, with the punchline being at Wiz's expense. His parody on Team America's theme song with the alteration being, United States of Motherfucking Smash, yeah, Ninja Jesus, and his reaction to Might Dai's name. And his death. All jokes that got a chuckle out of me, and there's more I could mention. I do want to address that there are awkward cuts during All Might's rundown, but that's due to Content ID claims, and they were kind enough to put the link to the Rooster Teeth version in a pinned comment, which doesn't have the awkward cuts. I recommend checking it out instead of the YouTube version if you can put up with the ads, or if you have a first membership like myself. Damn you, copyright. But hey, at least the fight animation wasn't affected in the slightest, and oh my god is it amazing. The characters being animated on 2s wasn't something I was expecting, but it made for a nice stylistic choice. Plus, at no point does it actually bother me. Not to mention, the visuals are just absolutely breathtaking, from the models, to the background, to all the effects. Some of them even cover the cinematic bars, and it just makes the attacks they're attached to feel even more powerful. But let's talk about the fighting itself. It's incredibly flashy and fun to watch, with both of them using a bunch of their different abilities, and this scene of Might Guy breakdancing is especially fun. I also love the dynamic these two have throughout the whole animation. They have a mutual respect for one another as fighters, despite this being a fight to the death, and that's what makes it feel so wholesome compared to almost every other episode. It's a genuine joy to see these two interacting with each other, especially during the arm wrestle at the beginning. It even goes as far as to being the reason why Might Guy chooses to escalate the fight by opening his gates, because he felt that All Might deserved a good fight. It's genuinely my favorite aspect of this episode, and I love how that's why the fight gets more and more intense as it goes on. And the voice acting is really good too. KG Tang did a great job voicing All Might, getting his inflections across very well, and sounding pretty similar to Chris Sabat. And Might Guy also sounded great. His voice actor was credited as Dick Splitter, leaving us to think that his official VA was voicing him, but Ben deconfirmed that on Twitter. However, if you watched Alejandro Saab react to the episode, he claims that Guy was voiced by Xander Mobus, the man who was a veteran back in Season 2, as he voiced in 4 episodes there. If it really is him, then this was quite the way for him to come back after 4 years of absence. And the fight track? I'm just gonna say it. Mighty is my absolute favorite original track in the series. I love how exciting it sounds. The lyrics are so inspiring. It's such a phenomenal track and I love listening to it. As a backing track, it only enhances this fight, adding to the wholesome factor. It's so good! But of course, it has to be a fight to the death, meaning one of them has to die. Imagine if these two didn't get so involved in their fight that they ended up killing each other. They could have been great friends. Oh well, there's always fanfiction. But yeah, the way the fight ended was awesome. Guy opening the 8th gate has always felt like a holy shit moment because even though he's impaled, basically at death's door, he does not want to lose the fight. And good lord, I loved hearing both characters' battle cries as Guy run towards All Might as he goes beyond Plus Ultra. And I loved the emotional impact of everything that happens after the killing blow. guy won the fight, but the strain from opening the 8th gate was too much, so he dies right next to All Might. I don't think I need to say anything else, it's so good. Same with the killing blow, although there is one small problem. It was an awesome way to end the fight and I love it, don't get me wrong, but the way Night Guy was used just isn't the source material. The way it was used there is that it was a super powerful kick that just kept pushing Madara back, even tearing up the ground. It had a lot of impact. Now imagine if that had happened to All Might in this episode. It's why it still came up short in getting into my top 3. I can imagine this topping Iron Man vs Lex Luthor at least if Night Guy was used against All Might in the same way it was used against Madara. Still, being number 4 is far from terrible, especially since it got this high in the first place from basically doing everything right. I wasn't sure of this being my favorite episode of the season when I first saw it, and it wasn't until just now when I decided to put it here. Hell, I was thinking any of the other episodes in the top 5 might go here instead, but this ended up being what I found myself enjoying the most. It is what I've chosen to call the best episode of Season 6. And that's the list. Despite all the difficulties, it was a lot of fun going through these episodes and ranking them. Season 7 is up next, and that could take a while given that we have 21 episodes to work with, so expect it to come out sometime in October or November. But knowing me, it'll more likely come out in November. For now, leave a like if you enjoyed, comment, subscribe, all that stuff I guess. Until then,